Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Scary Shorties wouldn't exist without you, the fans. Please like and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and share the show with your friends to help us grow. Thanks, guys. Satan's Seat, written by S. Pony Hill, read by Drew Grimm. S.E. Sanders sat on a wooden crate in the singular halo of lamplight from his lantern and stared at the wooden seat. The two employees he had hired to load the chair from the burned remains of the Lakeview Sanitarium had long since packed up their tools and departed the warehouse. But Sanders simply could not pull himself away from the partially open wooden crate and the wooden theater-style chair it contained. Even from here, a full 6 feet away, Sanders could smell the pungent odor of smoke, most likely infused into every section of wood that composed the backrest, the legs, the fold-up seat bottom, and every nut and bolt that bound the construction together. To him, it reeked of financial disaster. Sanders had over-leveraged himself on the Lakeview project, and he simply could not imagine any scenario where this fire would not result in his complete and total downfall. Admittingly, the project was a bold one, converting the 2-story, 50-room former tuberculosis sanitarium into a luxury resort. But he had studied the investment 6 ways from Sunday. He had even consulted his most trusted financial advisors, and to all involved the venture appeared profitable. The construction of the hydroelectric dam would flood the low-lying prairie below the steep bluff upon which the Lakeview structure sat, and Sanders would be sitting on a gold mine for waterfront tourism. So Sanders jumped in with both feet, draining his savings to place deposits on imported materials and securing a hard money loan for the sizable construction that would be required. Sanders had worked his way up from a lowly warehouse worker to being one of the foremost importers of rice products on the Gulf Coast. But here he was now, sitting on a crate in this dark warehouse staring at a single theater seat on the very edge of financial disaster. Sanders had of course paid for insurance on the property and materials, and this would undoubtedly cover the losses for the construction supplies, even compensating the carpentry and masonry contractors for their 2 short weeks of labor. Staring at this single chair, Sanders logically recognized that even the 69 other theater seats, all of which were reduced to nothing more than cinders, would be covered by the all-inclusive fire policy. But in spite of the insurance, he was also tragically aware that doom awaited him when the banks opened on Monday. Without the near-future infusion of cash from a flood of tourists attracted to a luxurious waterfront resort, there was no hope of Sanders covering even the bare minimum of payments. And a complete rebuild from the ground up? Sanders simply did not have the collateral for such a large, unsecured investment loan. Upon being awoken in the middle of the night with the alarming news that his investment was ablaze, that literally his money was going up in smoke, Sanders had rushed from his hotel in Swansville to personally survey the damage. By the time he could work his way through the crowd of curious onlookers and suit-covered firemen, the first rays of the morning sun were filtering sideways through the columns of smoke, rising from the collapsed remains of the building. It could not have been worse news. A total loss. Well, almost total. Seeing Sanders there, in a state of near shock at the sight of his entire future rendered in smoking ruins, Clem Muni, one of the masonry contractors, had approached him and beckoned Sanders to come view a most curious sight. And that is where he first laid eyes on the theater seat, of which he was currently staring at now. Part of Sanders' audacious plan for the former tuberculosis hospital was to convert one of the large fresh air rooms into a theater complete with a stage and custom folding wooden seats. Visitors to the spacious waterfront hotel would be regaled by the most talented acts of the day to top off a spirited day of water activities. The chairs themselves were handmade by a master woodworker in Georgia using hardy black ironwood, and the numbered labels, from 1 to 70, were pressed and shipped down from Atlanta. With the entire theater now nothing more than singled and collapsed timbers, and the rows of seats nothing more than piles of blackened ash, Sanders was being led over to a semicircle of gawking firemen. At the center of that circle of agape mouths and hushed whispers stood a single, completely undamaged theater seat. The stamped metal tag affixed to the backrest identified where this seat had once stood in the line of 70. 66. Maybe it was the shock and repressed trauma, or the morose need for some kind of morbid souvenir of the day that doomed his lavish lifestyle. But Sanders gave the order to have the seat crated and transported to his warehouse he was renting in Swansville. Much to his chagrin, none of the on-site contractors, nor the firemen, could be availed to even touch the odd chair that had defied the all-consuming fire. Frustrated by their backward superstitions, Sanders finally had to plead his case to the local folk who had gathered to gaze at the destruction. Most could not be set to the task for any price, but finally 2 fellows separated from the crowd and agreed to do the job for $3 hard each. Sanders first mistook them to be colored men, but their straight hair, high cheekbones, and pale blue eyes tilted him from that judgment. The 2 dark-skinned men made short work of removing the theater seat from the rubble and placing it into an empty materials crate, which they promptly secured shut with a few available nails. Payment in hand, the 2 men promptly made haste to return to their community, a hamlet that Sanders later learned was shortly due to be at least 20 feet underwater as the dam project proceeded. So here sat S.E. Sanders, an utterly devastated businessman, sitting dejected atop of one of his few remaining crates in an otherwise empty warehouse, staring at the single remaining physical symbol of his ruin. Then a simple, implausible, illogical question flit across his mind. Were the seats comfortable? He had spared no expenses for their construction, each one the result of days of studious labor of a master craftsman. Surely they would have been premium seating worthy of even the most discerning of entertainment seekers. The whisper of desire crept into his brain like a worm. To feel the curvature of the lathed wood beneath his bottom, the smoothness of the armrest beneath his forearms. To lean back in the spring-action backrest and imagine watching a renowned play that one would normally have to travel to New York City to enjoy. And hell, why shouldn't he? He had paid dearly for the sole surviving theater chair. It was literally the last remaining piece of his life's fortune. So Sanders hopped down from his crate and stepped resolutely over to the half-crated theater seat. He wrapped his fingers around the cold iron of the crowbar. He had requested the warehouse workers leave it behind for him. He then began to work on the flat sections of wood nailed together to encompass the chair. The work, manual labor of which he was not accustomed to anymore, resulted in several beads of sweat streaking down his broad forehead. But he made short work of the crate, as the 2 volunteers had sparingly secured the box panels with very few nails. After the flat wood side panels clattered to the hard floor of the nearly empty warehouse, Sanders tossed aside the heavy crowbar which rattled down beside the discarded materials of the box, with a ring like a bell echoing across the dark warehouse. He had hesitation now. What was stopping him from simply plopping down into the darkly stained and oiled wooden seat? Was it that to do so would be to physically resign himself to the reality that this was his fate? To lose what possessions he had left? A bankrupt failure hanging his head in shame? Or worse, to be consigned to a debtor's prison, forced to toil in meaningless manual labor? But S.E. Sanders was not yet ready to place that hat upon his head. Not today. Today he was still a proud Southern magnate of industry. Today he was still a successful businessman, the envy of his employees, and even his compatriots at the country club. Tomorrow be damned. Sanders spun around and settled down into the wooden theater seat. At first, Sanders thought that his lantern, still flickering its fueled wick illumination as he disassembled the box, had suddenly gone out. But then he realized it was still there, just 6 short feet away, still resting atop the crate where he had set it. But the lantern was now just a pinprick of pale bluish light, obscured by some haze. Sanders' brain tried to make sense of it. Had sitting in the chair stirred up some remnant of cinder and ash from the fire? Surely not to the degree necessary for this cloudy effect. And what was that sound? The previously empty warehouse now, in which he was assuredly alone according to the information provided by his ears, was full of unseen voices whispering in the darkness. And a single voice became more prominent. A dry, hoarse voice that made the hair on the back of Sanders' neck stand on end. The terrible voice spoke to him. Saul Ephraim Sanders. This shook Sanders to the core. He had not heard a living soul use his full Christian name in several decades. He only used his initials. Even in casual company, he was sure even his closest friends and business cohorts were clueless to what the SE stood for. Who is that? Sanders' own voice cracked. Come forward from the shadows, lest I mistake you for a villain. Villain to some, saviors to others. What I am to you is yet to be determined, the voice answered from somewhere in the swirling, shadowy mist. Somehow, even with the lump of fear in his throat, Sanders found enough bravery to challenge the voice once more. Come forward and show yourself. A shape materialized from the flowing murk, the shape of a man, tall and slim, barely more meat than a skeleton, and wearing a long coat and broad-brimmed hat. The shape approached and stepped around the flicker of light from the subdued lantern atop the crate to where Sanders could see him now more fully. It was a colored man, taller than Sanders and far more lankier, skin black as night and drawn tightly over a skeletal frame. But Sanders knew immediately this was no mere mortal. The pupils of whatever was wearing this human disguise reflected light like small round mirrors. Sanders could have easily jumped up from the theater seat, mind you, and ran from the warehouse with no difficulty. This may have been the very tactic you or I would have chosen if presented with an equally frightful scenario. But this was S.E. Sanders, widely known for his stubborn nature and bearish aggressiveness in daily business. There was no way he would flee in fear from a place he paid hard-earned money to rent. Sanders set his mind to calm himself. Even in this odd situation, heck, in any given situation, he was always confident he was the smartest man in the room. I know you are not what you pretend to be. What exactly are you? Me? The tall man creature asked, and his smile split the thin lips of his mouth, revealing 100 needle-like teeth. I am one of God's simple creations, just like you. Not like me, Sanders rejected the notion. Maybe a chess piece from a game began before he created mankind, but a creation of his nonetheless, the thin man cackled. How do you know my name? Sanders demanded. The skinny ghoul began to pace in a circle around the seated Sanders, and it was then that he noticed the creature was barefoot, and each step on the flat floor of the warehouse left an oily, smoky footprint. We know all of your names. We walk among you, unseen but not unfelt, humored by your wretched machinations. Your pitiful hopes and pathetic dreams. Such miserable pawns in his grand comedy. Sanders scoffed at the tall thing, thinking he had discovered a crack in the monster's claim. If you are what you claim to be, then even you would not dare call his creation a mere comedy. Even you are bound by God's design. This caused the thin man to laugh hysterically. The sound of this vile thing's laughter made a shiver run down Sanders' spine. Bound? Yes, we are all bound, one and all. But it's a joke that you are not in on, Saul Ephraim Sanders. Joke? Sanders pushed for more information. The only joke I see is your purpose here. This elicited another bout of horrible laughter. With a speed never seen in any living thing in Sanders' lifetime, the beast was suddenly eye to eye with the seated man. The scent of rotting flesh filled Sanders' nose. You just don't get it, do you? But how could you? Sanders continued his tactic of bold bravery in the face of this horrific encounter. Enough with the riddles. You grow tiresome. The being once again smiled, needle teeth mere inches from Sanders' face. Don't you see? He's the greatest comedian of all time, and he's playing to an audience too afraid to laugh. Sanders feigned pious anger. Blasphemy! Oh, but it's true. Job learned of the Most High sixth sense of humor the hard way. So did Abraham, and you will as well before the end. So you've come to end my life, is that it? The tall monster recoiled, as if fatally offended. My, not in the least. Quite the opposite, in fact. I am here to offer you what you desire, Saul. The thing's one-sided familiarity bothered Sanders, and he would have no more of it. You know my name well enough. Now tell me yours. Sanders seemed to remember reading somewhere that learning the name of supernatural beings such as this would grant some semblance of power over them. So he was doubtful that this thing would respond honestly, but it was worth a shot. Why, you may call me Monday, the creature said. Monday Nix. And what exactly do you think I want, Monday Nix? Nix's eyes squinted, and a smirk sneaked across its lips. You want to continue as you are, with your status, a reprieve from the executioner's axe. Financially speaking, of course. This made Sanders sit up a bit straighter in the wooden theater seat. That's an interesting proposition, assuming you have the power to manifest such a thing. But nothing comes for free, does it, Monday? Nix offered a simple response. Indeed. Sanders sat silent for a moment as Monday resumed its pacing. A faint warning voice whispered in his ear. But S.C. Sanders did not rise to his status by heeding such timid warnings. What's the price then, Monday? My soul? The suggestion made the gaunt Nix cackle once more. No, nothing so serious. All that would be required is, let's say, a contract of employment. So I would be your employee, is that it? So to speak. Sanders thought about this twist for a moment. And what would be the scope of work? Murder? Sacrifice? Something even worse? Nix cackled once more. No, nothing so blatantly nefarious. From time to time, we will commune, like we have here today. and I will instruct you to perform small acts, so trivial to you that they may seem comical, but important nonetheless. A butterfly flaps its wings in a garden in Georgia, and a typhoon strikes the shores of Japan. Sanders couldn't hardly believe the offer. It seemed ridiculously one-sided. And that's it? Small trivial acts in return for pulling my finances out of this twist. Nick stopped its pacing and folded its long-fingered hands. That's it. That's the bargain. And how would we seal this deal? A handshake? A contract signed in blood? Nix chuckled. I know, nothing so dramatic. So, all that is required is that I place my symbol on your forehead. This alarmed Sanders. Your symbol? On my forehead? Nix reached out and laid a skeletal hand on Sanders' shoulder, an attempt to calm the human. Do not fret. The symbol will be invisible to all but others such as myself. Sanders had been in business long enough to know to never look a gift horse in the mouth. Without any further thought or contemplation, Sanders gave Nix his one-word answer. Agreed. With no further conversation, Nix's comforting hand on Sanders' shoulder turned into an icy clamp. Monday Nix's other hand reached toward Sanders' forehead and extended a single claw-like finger. Wait, Sanders held up his hand. I need to know something first. Did you have a hand in the burning of my Lakeview property? I have to know that I was not manipulated into making this contract. Monday Nix smirked. Rest assured, the arson was not my doing. That would be the deed of Polly Blaylock, the good doctor's wife. She was quite upset over your demolition of what she still considered her charge and responsibility. But she died many years ago, did she not? Nix nodded. Dead, but not departed. A restless soul, you might say. I was but a mere spectator after she lit the blaze. Realization explodes in Sanders' mind like a light bulb being turned on. You sat in this chair, didn't you? And watched the Lakeview burn to the ground. Indeed I did. Nix continued his long, thin finger towards Sanders' forehead. Sanders clamped his eyes closed. He could feel the exquisite chilling pain of the demonic symbol being etched into the skin of his forehead, like an ice-cold knife blade. The frozen pain ceased suddenly. The icy hand released his shoulder. Sanders opened his eyes. He was alone. No tall, slim, ghastly Monday Nix. No unseen whispers in the dark. No swirling mist. Everything had returned to its normal state, the lantern casting its flickering halo of light from atop the wooden crate. The large, near-empty warehouse remained quiet. Sanders reached up and rubbed his forehead. He felt nothing out of the ordinary. S.E. Sanders giggled to himself. Had he imagined the entire thing? Perhaps he had settled into the comfortable theater seat and simply fell asleep. He had been laboring the majority of the day. What had seemed so real, the swirling mist, the hoarse voice cackling in his ear, it was now fading into the absurd. Just as he was ready to resign the entire ridiculous event to the category of a bad dream, one of the doors of the warehouse flung open. Mr. Sanders! Mr. Sanders! Someone yelled for him. Sanders held up his hand to shield his eyes from the harsh shaft of light pouring in from the open door. I'm here. Who is that? It's me, Clem Muni, the mason, the voice answered from the doorway. I've been sent to fetch you back to the Lakeview. Then you have come in vain, Sanders answered dismissively. I have no need or desire to revisit that accursed property. Oh, Mr. Sanders, sir, you should come, Clem begged. The firefighters have found something you need to see. Sanders rose from the theater seat and waved to dismiss Clem. I'm sorry, Clem. I've had a really long night, and I can't be bothered with this right now. I don't need to find any more miracle rubbish in the fire. No, sir, Mr. Sanders. This is something more, something much more. The excited tone in Clem's voice caught Sanders' attention. The sheriff is guarding until you arrive. The sheriff? Guarding something? Perhaps this was something Sanders should see. The crowd of curious residents had significantly diminished by the time Sanders arrived in Clem Muni's horse-drawn cart. Both of the volunteer fire department's horse-drawn pump trucks were still there, now joined by Sheriff Rollins' 1913 model car, one of the few cars in the entire county. Clem dragged Sanders by his sleeve through the wreckage to a section of rubble, little more than a pile of timbers and a partially collapsed blackened brick wall. At the base of the wall stood Sheriff Rollins with several of the firefighters. Clem led Sanders through the maze of debris and joined the men. There, revealed beneath the charred floorboards torn up by firefighting tools, was a wooden chest bound with iron. The blackened box was obviously very old, and the lid was lying open to reveal its amazing contents. Gold. Though the top layer was but a melted slag from the intense heat of the fire, the chest was obviously stuffed with hundreds of gold coins. Looks like Confederate gold, offered Sheriff Rollins. No telling how long it's been hiding here. Sanders bent down on one knee, reached down a hand, and felt the hard layer of melted gold with his fingers, perhaps just to make sure it was real. Ever the one to get to the bottom line, Sanders cut to the chase with the sheriff. What's the law on such things as this, Sheriff? Well, generally speaking, it would belong to the property owner, explained Sheriff Rollins. I'd say this chest of good luck belongs to you, Mr. Sanders. Good luck indeed. Sanders nodded his head in silence. Somehow, he suspected that luck had nothing to do with this turn of events. Sanders rose back to his feet. Clem? Sanders called over his shoulder, still looking down on the discovery that would offset the financial destruction of the fire. Clem, the theater seat back at the warehouse, Sanders instructed. I'd like you to recrate it and transport it to my house. Okay, Clem answered, with a little confusion in his voice. There's an extra $5 in it for yourself. This brightened Clem's disposition and went in no small measure to dispelling his confusion with the directive. Clem immediately spun on his heel to make his way out of the rubble and back to his horse-drawn cart to complete the task. Oh, and Clem, one more thing. Don't sit in the chair.